Welcome to Human Monsters. Ryan White is largely unknown to millennials and the subsequent generation, but to my generation and those that came before me, he was the poster boy for AIDS in the 1980s. His was an unusual case, for he contracted the disease as a child. AIDS was a poorly understood disease at the time, assumed to be exclusively germane to the gay community. It was also believed to be contagious to the point where people presumed it could be spread through handshakes and doorknobs. Today, the stigma and ignorance that beset AIDS patients in the 1980s has been dispelled. The prognosis for people with the disease has also improved a great deal. Provided that they follow the prescribed regimen for treatment, the life expectancy for people with this disease now reflects that of the general population. Ryan White was not quite as fortunate as the AIDS patients of today. Thus, I have chosen to tell his story. Ryan became a target of harassment, discrimination, prejudice, and hysteria. He was catapulted into the national spotlight, but he never coveted fame. He only wanted to be a common teenage boy, living a normal life. His story is a classic example of how sometimes mainstream society and its moral code can produce monsters in its own right, all in the name of public safety in this case. This is the story of how an innocent, well-intentioned young man became persona non grata by a community that ignored the scientific consensus about a disease and developed their own treatment of this young man, which only contributed more suffering to one undeserving patient's life. December 6th, 1971, Kokomo, Indiana. Ryan White was born on this day to parents Hubert and Jeannie White. When Ryan was circumcised, the wound would not clot and continued to bleed profusely. He was diagnosed with severe hemophilia A. For the rest of his life, he would have to administer a product called Factor VIII, which is created using the pooled plasma of non-hemophiliacs. As a result of this condition, he was unable to participate in some sports and other forms of play that presented the possibility of injury. The injections of Factor VIII were tiresome and inconvenient, but without it, he faced potentially fatal blood loss in the event of injury. Ryan thrived as a hemophiliac receiving Factor VIII nonetheless, so much so that when the Howard County Hemophiliac Society held its fundraising drive in 1973, he was the poster boy. His picture, taken due to this development, was featured in an issue of the Kokomo Tribune in March. Ryan's parents had a toxic relationship, with verbal and physical abuse issued by his father and in retaliation from his mother. They divorced in 1978. Hubert spent very little time with his children after the divorce. Unbeknownst to the general population at the time, a new sexually transmitted disease began to emerge. Unlike other STDs, like gonorrhea or syphilis, there was no cure, and the death rate was at 100%. However, the disease would go undiagnosed and unnamed until the 1980s. In fact, it was only acknowledged by the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention in 1981. December 17th, 1984. Ryan was healthy throughout most of his childhood. This all changed when he was stricken with pneumonia at this time. He had a persistent cough and was so lethargic that stepping off the school bus left him completely exhausted. These were among the most benign of the symptoms. He was admitted to hospital in such poor health that he was breathing through a respirator. After undergoing a lung biopsy, He was found to be carrying the AIDS virus. He contracted the disease from 6 tainted treatments of Factor VIII. Jeannie didn't want to ruin Ryan's Christmas by telling him about his diagnosis, so she postponed the announcement until December 26th, when he was still in the hospital and the family celebrated in his room. Jeannie said finally, "Ryan, you know you've been really sick. Well, they say you have AIDS." Ryan said he was going to die. Jeannie said, "We are all going to die sometime. We just don't know when." "Always one to put a positive spin on things," Ryan said. "Let's just pretend I don't have it." Jeannie told him it was impossible. His sister Andrea said, "Mom, that's not what he means." Ryan said, "See, Mom, she knows me better than you. I just don't want every time somebody enters a room to talk like, 'Poor Ryan, he's dying.' I just want to go ahead and go on with my life." Between 1979 and 1984, 90% of hemophiliacs receiving blood clotting plasma products were diagnosed with AIDS and/or hepatitis C. At the time that the virus was detected in Ryan White's blood, his T-cell count had plummeted to 25 per millimeter cubed. A healthy person without AIDS would have somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 1,200. A number beneath 200 is considered AIDS-defining in the U.S. As far as Ryan's attendant physicians were concerned, the outlook was grim. They predicted he would only live another 6 months. When early 1985 rolled around, Ryan began to feel better and decided he was fit to return to school. His mother contacted the school to ask if he could be re-enrolled. She was told that he would not be admitted. June 30th, 1985. A formal request to allow Ryan White to attend classes was denied by Western School Corporation Superintendent James O. Smith. Jeannie launched an appeal process that took 8 months and included many setbacks. Parents were aware that Ryan had AIDS. The disease was poorly understood at the time. Consequently, they assumed that their children would catch the disease simply by dint of sharing a space with Ryan. Due to this, they put pressure on school authorities to ban Ryan from the campus. The school was attended by 360 students. 117 parents and 50 teachers signed a petition supporting the proposition to ban Ryan from setting foot on the school property. The principal and school board caved under the pressure and instituted the ban. Ryan's family filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court in Indianapolis. The court would not hear the case, stating that they would only do so after administrative appeals were resolved. November 25th. An officer representing the Indiana Department of Education ruled that the school must abide by the Indiana Board of Health guidelines. Therefore, Ryan's readmittance to school was approved. A setback that beset AIDS patients as they struggled to gain acceptance in society at this time came in the form of an article that was published in 1983 by the American Medical Association. It contained the quote, "Evidence suggests household contact may transmit AIDS." Though this finding would later turn out to be false, at the time it was accepted as truth given the agency's credibility as a medical authority. People with AIDS continue to suffer social exclusion, harassment, and discrimination as a result. February 1986. Ryan White returned to school for one day, 4 hours and 45 minutes to be exact. The date of his return was widely anticipated by students and parents. 151 of the 369 students stayed home. Picketers demonstrated in front of the school. They held signs that read hate-filled sentiments like faggot, go home gay, go home to die, students against AIDS. Perhaps those last picketers would have found it curious that Ryan too was against AIDS. Other demonstrators wore surgical scrubs and masks. Some wore morbid Halloween masks. There wasn't as much outright hostility on the inside. Some of Ryan's alumni patted him on the back as a show of support. Sometimes when Ryan was banned from attending school in person, arrangements would be made for him to monitor classes over the telephone. The quality of this standard of learning was low due to the lack of student-teacher engagement. Other boycotts followed. Ryan had worked as a paper boy, and many of the customers on his route canceled their subscriptions for fear that AIDS could be transmitted through newsprint. Even church proved to be a place where Ryan would not be spared from marginalization. As Ryan recalled of an occasion when he went to shake hands with his fellow parishioners he had known very well for a long time, I held my hand out to empty air. Other people's hands were moving every which way, in all directions, away from me. No one in the whole church wanted to shake my hand and wish me peace on Easter. When their car's transmission failed in the church's parking lot, nobody would help them. There was one ray of hope at this point when it came to the fight to put Ryan back in school. Dr. Woodrow Myers, who was the state health commissioner for Indiana, happened to be extensively experienced in treating AIDS patients in San Francisco. Both he and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention informed the school board that the rest of the student body was not at risk of contracting AIDS due to sharing a space with Ryan. The school board and the parents ignored this data. Dr. Myers and the CDC's assertions were buttressed by an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was a study of 101 people who spent 3 months living in close contact with AIDS patients. They did not interact with the patients sexually. To quote the study, the risk of catching the virus under these circumstances was, quote, minimal to non-existent. This was true even when it came to sharing toothbrushes, razors, clothing, combs, and drinking glasses. They even slept in the same bed and exchanged hugs and kisses. Again, the individuals who were not carrying the virus were not HIV positive as an outcome of the study. Still, none of this information could convince school authorities to allow Ryan to attend classes with his peers. Finally, Ryan was admitted into school in April. In response, some parents withdrew their children and started an alternative school. Ryan and his family were threatened with violence and lawsuits. As Ryan's mother, Jeannie, told it, sometimes when they were out in public, people would recognize Ryan and yell, "We know you're queer." The staff of the Kokomo Tribune, which had been supportive of Ryan, was subjected to ridicule and death threats for their stance. In this clip, Ryan spoke candidly about the harassment he endured at school.
Ryan White was a so-called innocent victim of AIDS. That was a polite way of saying that he wasn't gay or an intravenous drug user. He got the disease from a bad blood transfusion. By the end of his life, he also got a lot of compassion, but it was awfully late coming.
You and I were chatting, before we went on the air, and you were telling me some of the charges that kids were leveling against you while you were in school back in Kokomo. Just tell our audience about that, would you?
Well, they marked my folders. They marked fag and other cruel things.
I was talking about, they accused you of what, spitting on the vegetables or something?
Yeah, spitting on vegetables and taking bites out of cookies and putting them back.
Why would people do that? Just to be spiteful, or because they're scared?
Well, I think they were scared first and foremost, and it just led to where, their fear just took control of them, and they just believed what they wanted to believe.
Jeannie White turned to the National Hemophilia Foundation for support. Their response was disappointing. They were critical of hers and Ryan's decision to go public with the AIDS diagnosis and offered no support. As she recounted, when Ryan first became ill, I really got into it with the president of the National Hemophilia Foundation. I was very upset because they didn't come forward to help me out at all. I don't mean with money. I mean support-wise. I couldn't get any help from them when I was trying to get Ryan back into school because I knew hemophiliacs all had it. They tried to hide AIDS among hemophiliacs. I couldn't go to the media and tell them that 95% of the severe hemophiliacs now were positive for AIDS, because then I would be hurting all my counterparts. I couldn't do that to the mothers I have talked to over the years. The president of the National Hemophilia Foundation told me, well, we're letting the medical profession fight our battles for us because we're trying to keep a very low profile. And I said, we're talking about every child, every hemophiliac here. We're not just talking about Ryan White. I spent 2 hours one night on the phone with him, and I was just very irate after I finished. Ryan was admitted to Western Middle School for the 1985-86 school year when he was in the 8th grade. Due to bullying and social exclusion, he was deeply depressed and had a very limited social network. Jeannie recalled the relentless cruelty to which Ryan had been subjected in school at that time. Every minute of the short time he was there was hell. On one occasion, somebody had opened up Ryan's locker and written faggot and get butt fucked on his folders. She noted that none of the kids wanted to sit next to him in class. Said Jeannie, when he walked down the hall, the kids would flatten themselves against the walls and yell, "There he goes, the AIDS kid, stay back." Or they'd run up and touch him, then touch other kids and say, "Now you've got it." I began to feel completely paranoid about my fellow citizens. I didn't know whom to trust, so I trusted no one. The Dean of Students remembers Ryan's interactions with other students differently. He remembers Ryan being surrounded by friends who were very supportive and kind. He commented on this. Ryan always had a crowd of people that sat on his table. He interacted with them. There was a social stigma attached to him. Certainly that was a very minor group of people, and never did I see anybody do anything to him that I would consider taunting or teasing or any of those kinds of things while he was in my sight. Nor was I ever able to validate any of that. Wanda and Heath Bowen were friends and supporters of Ryan. They protected and defended him in any way they could, which didn't exactly score points with anybody outside their immediate social circle. Older kids would call Heath gay. Wanda would be called bitch. Ryan would put on a show of acting like the name-calling and other forms of harassment didn't bother him, but the more intuitive of his friends could tell he was deeply hurt by these actions. As Ryan told it, they backed up against their lockers when they saw me coming, or they threw themselves against the hallway walls, shouting, "Watch out! Watch out! There he is!" Maybe some were putting me on. I think most of them were acting like that just to get to me, to make me mad mainly. But it hurt that no one wanted to get close to me. His friend Heath got suspended for striking a student who told a joke that went like, "What kind of bread do fags like? Ryan white bread." Despite such remarks, Ryan still wanted to attend school. As he once said, "I like being at school. I don't want to stay home alone. I want to be with my friends, just like everybody else." The school required him to eat with disposable plastic utensils, use a separate washroom, and waived the requirement for him to participate in a gym class. The White family continued to receive threats. One day the family came home to find a bullet had been fired through the living room window. It was fired from a BB gun, but the Whites took the threat seriously. Their address had been published by a local newspaper, so the shooter didn't have to search very deeply to find out where they lived. This was the final straw. The family decided to leave Kokomo. Discrimination came in other forms. One day when Ryan and his family went to a diner, they asked for glasses of water, but were given cans of Coke instead. When they finished eating, the owner of the diner instructed the waitress to throw all the dishes the family had been eating on in the garbage. Rumors about Ryan were spread. Some claimed that he deliberately spat and sneezed on produce at the grocery store. Others said that he spat on people in anger. Vandals spray painted the word faggot on the Whites' house and storage barn. Their garbage was frequently removed from its receptacles and dumped all over the yard. Their property, including the house, was often egged. The school year having commenced, the family moved to Cicero, Indiana. Ryan began 9th grade at Hamilton Heights High School in Arcadian, Indiana. He was very nervous when he walked through the school's doors for the first time on August 31st, 1986. He was greeted by the principal, Tony Cook, the school system superintendent, Bob G. Kamal, and a coterie of students who had done some research on AIDS and were not averse to shaking his hand. In fact, the entire school had done research on AIDS. They had all seen some presentations to learn more about it and had encouraged Ryan to start school a week late so that the student body and the staff would be prepared for his arrival. Ryan's plight as a minor with AIDS, who was denied his right to an education due to discrimination based on his health status, continued to attract increasing media focus. It got to the point that he became a public figure on a national level. This led many to dub him a poster boy for AIDS. It dovetailed with the coverage that the disease was getting in the mainstream media. It was the health crisis of the decade, and much of the press coverage was hysterical and histrionic. On the cover of an issue of Life magazine blared the headline, "Now no one is safe from AIDS." The main article's title went, "The new victims, the AIDS minorities, are beginning to infect the heterosexual, drug-free majority." The tides were turning, however. After having been associated exclusively with the gay community, Ryan White's story was an eye-opener for the public. Now the average American knew that the virus didn't discriminate. That a heterosexual boy from Middle America could become HIV positive despite being devoid of sexual experience was the wake-up call the country needed. The number of articles published on the subject in periodicals doubled from 1985 to 1986. At the time, Ryan began to appear on national television programs and was interviewed by widely circulated newspapers. All these media outlets were keen to know how Ryan was faring as a carrier of the disease. Though he was honest and even blunt about the negative attention he and his family received due to the prejudice and ignorance that surrounded the topic, he was never one to feel sorry for himself, as evidenced in his memoir entitled My Own Story. Once his position as poster child for the AIDS crisis was cemented, he made personal appearances for fundraising events and educational campaigns dedicated to raising awareness about the truth of the disease and those who were afflicted. Many events were focused on the cause of benefiting pediatric AIDS patients. Several celebrities befriended Ryan in an effort to alleviate the stigma that had affected so many people who suffered from the disease. Among them were John Mellencamp, Elton John, Michael Jackson, Ronald and Nancy Reagan, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He also established friendships with other children who had AIDS, as well as children who had other terminal diseases. He was a regular guest on Phil Donahue's show, among others. Olympic diver Greg Louganis traveled halfway across the country to give Ryan his gold medal. Ryan's celebrity crush was Alyssa Milano, who gave him a friendship bracelet and a kiss. Elton John lent his mother $16,500 to make a down payment on the house in Cicero. He would not accept repayment. He diverted the money to a scholarship fund for Ryan's sister. Ryan had his own car to drive to school every day, courtesy of Michael Jackson, a 1988 Ford Mustang LX 5.0. Despite the attention and donations, Ryan did not enjoy fame. He was also frustrated by remarks made about his mother and his upbringing that implied that either might have been responsible for him catching the disease. According to such rumors, he didn't get AIDS from a blood transfusion, but from Jeannie's allegedly, quote, perverted lifestyle. He said at one point that he would happily give up the fame and gifts to be rid of the disease. In 1988, Ryan spoke to the President's Commission on the HIV epidemic. He detailed his experiences regarding the backlash he faced when trying to return to school following his diagnosis. He went on to say that public education campaigns to enlighten the public and destigmatized individuals who had contracted the disease had been effective in reducing the incidence of harassment and discrimination. This is a transcript of his statement. My name is Ryan White. I am 16 years old. I have hemophilia, and I have AIDS. When I was 3 days old, the doctors told my parents I was a severe hemophiliac, meaning my blood does not clot. Lucky for me, there was a product just approved by the Food and Drug Administration. It was called Factor VIII, which contains the clotting agent found in blood. While I was growing up, I had many bleeds or hemorrhages in my joints, which make it very painful. Twice a week, I would receive injections or IVs of Factor VIII, which clotted my blood and then broke it down. A bleed occurs from a broken blood vessel or vein. The blood then had nowhere to go, so it would swell up in a joint. You could compare it to trying to pour a quart of milk into a pint-sized container of milk. The first 5 to 6 years of my life were spent in and out of the hospital. All in all, I led a pretty normal life. Most recently, my battle has been against AIDS and the discrimination surrounding it. On December 17, 1984, I had surgery to remove 2 inches of my left lung due to pneumonia. After 2 hours of surgery, the doctors told my mother I had AIDS. I contracted AIDS through my Factor VIII, which is made from blood. When I came out of surgery, I was on a respirator and had a tube in my left lung. I spent Christmas and the next 30 days in the hospital. A lot of my time was spent searching, thinking, and planning my life. I came face to face with death at 13 years old. I was diagnosed with AIDS, a killer. Doctors told me I'm not contagious. Given 6 months to live and being the fighter that I am, I set high goals for myself. It was my decision to live a normal life, go to school, be with my friends, and enjoying day-to-day activities. It was not going to be easy. The school I was going to said they had no guidelines for a person with AIDS. The school board, my teachers, and my principal voted to keep me out of the classroom even after the guidelines were set by the ISBH for fear of someone getting AIDS from me by casual contact. Rumors of sneezing, kissing, tears, sweat, and saliva spreading AIDS caused people to panic. We began a series of court battles for 9 months while I was attending classes by telephone. Eventually, I won the right to attend school, but the prejudice was still there. Listening to medical facts was not enough. People wanted 100% guarantees. There are no 100% guarantees in life, but concessions were made by Mom and me to help ease the fear. We decided to meet them halfway. Separate restrooms, no gym, separate drinking fountains, disposable eating utensils and trays. Even though we knew AIDS was not spread through casual contact, nevertheless, parents of 20 students started their own school. They were still not convinced. Because of the lack of education on AIDS, discrimination, fear, panic, and lies surrounded me. I became the target of Ryan White jokes, lies about me biting people, spitting on vegetables and cookies, urinating on bathroom walls. Some restaurants threw away my dishes. My school locker was vandalized inside, and folders were marked fag and other obscenities. I was labeled a troublemaker, my mom an unfit mother, and I was not welcome anywhere. People would get up and leave so they would not have to sit anywhere near me. Even at church, people would not shake my hand. This brought on the news media, TV crews, interviews, and numerous public appearances. I became known as the AIDS boy. I received thousands of letters of support from all around the world, all because I wanted to go to school. Mayor Koch of New York was the first public figure to give me support. Entertainers, athletes, and stars started giving me support. I met some of the greatest, like Elton John, Greg Louganis, Max Headroom, Alyssa Milano, my teen idol, Lyndon King of the Los Angeles Raiders, and Charlie Sheen. All of these, plus many more, became my friends, but I had very few friends at school. How could these people in the public eye not be afraid of me, but my whole town was? It was difficult, at times, to handle, but I tried to ignore the injustice because I knew the people were wrong. My family and I held no hatred for those people because we realized they were victims of their own ignorance. We had great faith that with patience, understanding, and education, that my family and I could be helpful in changing their minds and attitudes around. Financial hardships were rough on us, even though Mom had a good job at GM. The more I was sick, the more work she had to miss. Bills became impossible to pay. My sister Andrea was a championship roller skater who had to sacrifice too. There was no money for her lessons and travel. AIDS can destroy a family if you let it. But luckily for my sister and me, Mom taught us to keep going. Don't give up. Be proud of who you are and never feel sorry for yourself. After 2.5 years of declining health, 2 attacks of pneumocystis, shingles, a rare form of whooping cough, and liver problems. I faced fighting chills, fevers, coughing, tiredness, and vomiting. I was very ill and being tutored at home. The desire to move into a bigger house, to avoid living A.I.D.S daily, and a dream to be accepted by a community and school became possible, and a reality with a movie about my life, the Ryan White story. My life is better now. At the end of the school year, 1986 to 87, my family and I decided to move to Cicero, Indiana. We did a lot of hoping and praying that the community would welcome us, and they did. For the first time in 3 years, we feel we have a home, a supportive school, and lots of friends. The communities of Cicero, Atlanta, Arcadia, and Noblesville, Indiana are now what we call home. I'm feeling great. I am a normal, happy teenager again. I have a learner's permit. I attend sports functions and dances. My studies are important to me. I made the honor roll just recently with 2 A's and 2 B's. I'm just one of the kids, and all because the students at Hamilton Heights High School listened to the facts, educated their parents and themselves, and believed in me. I believe in myself as I look forward to graduating from Hamilton Heights High School in 1991. Hamilton Heights High School is proof that A.I.D.S education in schools works. The Ryan White story is available in its entirety on YouTube. When the film was broadcast on television, it was seen by 15 million viewers. Residents of Kokomo felt that the film portrayed their town and its people unfairly. The municipal government received complaints from across the nation. 1990, Ryan's health began to deteriorate. He was succumbing to the disease. He appeared on the cover of Life magazine in his mother's embrace, looking gravely ill. The article described the many symptoms he struggled with, and the international exposure changed the public's opinions about people with A.I.D.S, while people reeled from shock at what residents of Kokomo had put the White family through. When Ryan was back in school, he enjoyed increasing popularity due to his burgeoning celebrity. Ryan managed to attend an after-Oscar party in Los Angeles with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. He spoke to them about how he was going to attend his prom and intended to go to college. March 29th, Ryan was admitted to Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis. He had a respiratory infection. As the condition progressed, he was sedated and placed in a ventilator. Elton John visited him at his bedside. The hospital's switchboard was deluged with calls from people offering their support for Ryan. Ryan White died on April 8, 1990. His funeral took place on April 11th and was standing room only, as over 1,500 people attended. His pallbearers were Elton John, football player Howie Long, and Phil Donahue. Elton John performed the song Skyline Pigeon. Other celebrity attendees were Donald Trump, Barbara Bush, and Michael Jackson. Ronald Reagan wrote a tribute to Ryan that was published in the Washington Post on the day of his funeral. A quote from the article: "We owe it to Ryan to make sure that the fear and ignorance that chased him from his home and his school will be eliminated. We owe it to Ryan to open our hearts and our minds to those with A.I.D.S. We owe it to Ryan to be compassionate, caring, and tolerant towards those with A.I.D.S, their families, and friends. It's the disease that's frightening, not the people who have it." Ryan was buried in Cicero, close to the former home of his mother. A year later, his grave was vandalized on 4 separate occasions. Ryan White's legacy inspired the creation of several charities that benefit people who suffer from AIDS. Indiana University started a dance marathon in 1991 to raise money for the Riley Hospital for Children. Between 1991 and 2022, they raised over $50 million. Some of the proceeds were allocated to the Ryan White Infectious Disease Clinic, which treats critically ill children. Gay rights and AIDS activist Larry Kramer said of Ryan White, "I think little Ryan White probably did more to change the face of this illness and to move people than anyone." And he continues to be a presence through his mom, Jeannie White. She has an incredibly moving presence as she speaks around the world. The media frequently dubbed Ryan a so-called innocent victim of AIDS. Ryan and his mother bristled at this characterization. They objected to the implication that gay people were somehow guilty, which suggested that they spread the disease consciously and with malice aforethought. To quote Jeannie White, "Ryan always said, 'I'm just like everyone else with AIDS, no matter how I got it.' And he would never have lived as long as he did without the gay community. The people we knew in New York made sure we knew about the latest treatments way before we would have known in Indiana. I hear mothers today say they're not going to work with no gay community on anything. Well, if it comes to your son's life, you better start changing your heart and your attitudes around." August 1990. Congress enacted the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resources Emergency Act, also known as the Ryan White Care Act. It is the largest federally funded program that benefits AIDS patients. It provides access to care for low-income, uninsured, and underinsured people who are HIV positive, as well as their families. Extensions were put into effect several times throughout the years. This is a speech given in 2009 by then-President Barack Obama when he renewed the Ryan White Care Act.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, we often speak about AIDS as if it's going on somewhere else, and for good reason. This is a virus that has touched lives and decimated communities around the world, particularly in Africa. But often overlooked is the fact that we face a serious HIV/AIDS epidemic of our own, right here in Washington, D.C., and right here in the United States of America. And today, we are taking 2 important steps forward in the fight that we face here at home. It has been nearly 3 decades since this virus first became known. But for years, we refused to recognize it for what it was. It was coined a gay disease. Those who had it were viewed with suspicion. There was a sense among some that people afflicted by AIDS somehow deserved their fate and that it was acceptable for our nation to look the other way. A number of events and advances over the years have broadened our understanding of this cruel illness. One of them came in 1984, when a 13-year-old boy from central Indiana contracted HIV/AIDS from a transfusion. Doctors assured people that Ryan White posed no risk to his classmates or his community, but ignorance was still widespread. People didn't yet understand or believe that the virus couldn't be spread by casual contact. Parents protested Ryan's attendance in class. Some even pulled their kids out of school. Things got so bad that the White family had to ultimately move to another town. It would have been easy for Ryan and his family to stay quiet and to fight the illness in private. But what Ryan showed was the same courage and strength that so many HIV-positive activists have shown over the years and show around the world today. And because he did, we didn't just become more informed about HIV/AIDS, we began to take action to fight it. In 1990, the year Ryan passed away, 2 great friends and unlikely political allies, Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch, came together and introduced the Comprehensive AIDS Resources Emergency Act. the CARE Act, which was later named after Ryan. In a few minutes, I'm going to sign the fourth reauthorization of the Ryan White CARE Act. Now, in the past, policy differences have made reauthorizations of this program divisive and controversial. That didn't happen this year. And for that, the members of Congress that are here today deserve extraordinary credit for passing this bill in the bipartisan manner that it deserves. Tom Harkin and Mike Enzi in the Senate, we are grateful to you for your extraordinary work. Speaker Pelosi, who's always leading the charge on so many issues, Frank Pallone Jr., Joe Barton, Barbara Lee, and Donna Christensen in the House, thank you for your extraordinary work. Oh, don't worry, I'm getting to Henry. Nancy's always looking at for members, but we've got a special section for Henry. And Chairman Henry Waxman, who began holding hearings on AIDS in 1982, before there was even a name for AIDS, was leading here in Washington to make sure that this got the informed attention that it deserved, and who led the House in passing the original Ryan White legislation in 1990. I also want to acknowledge the HIV community for crafting a consensus document that did so much to help move this process forward. Some of the advocates so important to this legislation are with us here today. Ernest Hopkins from Cities Advocating for Emergency AIDS Relief, Frank Oldham Jr., President and CEO of the National Association of People with AIDS, and Julie Schofield, Executive Director of the National Alliance of State and Territorial AIDS Directors. And I'm especially honored that Ryan White's mother, Jeannie White Ginder, is here today. For 25 years, Jeannie had an immeasurable impact in helping ramp up America's response to this epidemic. While we lost Ryan at too young an age, Jeannie's efforts have extended the lives and saved the lives of so many others, and we are so appreciative to you. Thank you. You know, over the past 19 years, this legislation has evolved from an emergency response into a comprehensive national program for the care and support of Americans living with HIV/AIDS. It helps communities that are most severely affected by this epidemic and often least served by our healthcare system, including minority communities, the LGBT community, rural communities, and the homeless. It's often the only option for the uninsured and the underinsured, and it provides life-saving medical services to more than 500,000 Americans every year in every corner of the country. It's helped us to open a critical front on the ongoing battle against HIV/AIDS. But let me be clear, this is a battle that's far from over, and it's a battle that all of us need to do our part to join. AIDS may no longer be the leading killer of Americans ages 25 to 44, as it once was, but there are still 1.1 million people living with HIV/AIDS in the United States, and more than 56,000 new infections occur every single year. Some communities still experience unacceptably high rates of infection. Gay men make up 2 or 3% of the population, but more than half of all new cases. African Americans make up roughly half of all new cases. Nearly half of all new cases now occur in the South. And a staggering 7% of Washington, D.C.'s residents between the ages of 40 and 49 live with HIV/AIDS. And the epidemic here isn't as severe as it is in several other U.S. cities. So tackling this epidemic will take far more aggressive approaches than we've seen in the past, not only from our federal government, but also state and local governments, from local community organizations, and from places of worship. But it will also take an effort to end the stigma that has stopped people from getting tested, that has stopped people from facing their own illness, and that has sped the spread of this disease for far too long. A couple of years ago, Michelle and I were in Africa, and we tried to combat this stigma when we were in Kenya by taking a public HIV/AIDS test. And I'm proud to announce today we're about to take another step towards ending that stigma. 22 years ago, in a decision rooted in fear rather than fact, the United States instituted a travel ban on entry into the country for people living with HIV/AIDS. Now, We talk about reducing the stigma of this disease, yet we've treated a visitor living with it as a threat. We lead the world when it comes to helping stem the AIDS pandemic, yet we are one of only a dozen countries that still bar people from HIV from entering our own country. If we want to be the global leader in combating HIV/AIDS, we need to act like it. And that's why on Monday, my administration will publish a final rule that eliminates the travel ban, effective just after the new year. Congress and President Bush began this process last year, and they ought to be commended for it. We are finishing the job. It's a step that will encourage people to get tested and get treatment. It's a step that will keep families together, and it's a step that will save lives. And we are continuing the work of crafting a coordinated, measurable national HIV/AIDS strategy to stem and suppress this epidemic. I'm pleased to report that the Office of National AIDS Policy, led by Jeffrey Crawley, has already held 8 in a series of 14 community discussions in cities across the country. They've brought together faith-based organizations and businesses, schools and research institutions, people living with HIV and concerned citizens, gathering ideas on how to target a national response that effectively reduces HIV infections, improves access to treatment, and eliminates health disparities. And we are encouraged by the energy, the enthusiasm, and great ideas that we've collected so far. We can't give Ryan White back to Jeannie, back to his mom. But what we can do, what the legislation that I'm about to sign has done for nearly 20 years, is honor the courage that he and his family showed. What we can do is to take more action and educate more people. What we can do is keep fighting each and every day until we eliminate this disease from the face of the earth. So with that, let me sign this bill.
This is from an appearance by Jeannie White on Katie Couric's show.
Welcome, Jeannie White Ginder. So nice to see you. For so many of us, Jeannie, remember Ryan's story as if it were yesterday. It's been 25 years since Ryan died, and you must think about him still almost every day.
Every day, and I don't think any mother who has lost a child doesn't have that pain every day. Yeah, everybody told me to get easier. It doesn't get any easier, but you learn to live with it really because you have to, not because you want to.
And you have done so many extraordinary things honoring his memory, as did Ryan himself during his 18 years on this earth. And I hope that gives you some degree of comfort. I know it still must be very difficult. And when you found out that he had AIDS, that you heard that word, what was your reaction?
How? Why did my son get this disease? And they said, well, we think this might be the tip of the iceberg. We think that all hemophiliacs might have been infected. And I was like, how could this happen? I mean, if it's such a new disease, why couldn't you even be wrong? So I think I kept thinking that just somehow, some way, have it be something else.
That there must be some mistake.
Yeah, there must be some mistake.
And in the years following his diagnosis, as we saw, and I remember it so vividly, your family faced so much hatred, ignorance, and fear. And I'm just wondering, what was it like as a mom and as just a member of your community to have to deal with all of that? How did you get through it, Jeannie?
I think faith, and I think setting priorities. Everybody thought the number one priority was fighting to get Ryan in school. That was not my number one priority. My number one priority was keeping Ryan alive as long as I could. If any way I could do it, I wanted to do it. Number two was trying to keep my daughter included in our family, which Ryan got so much attention.
Right, Andrea was born 2 years after Ryan.
Yes, she's 2 years younger. Trying to keep Andrea involved in our family. Number three was trying to keep my job at General Motors, which we had to have. I had to have that job. And number 3 or 4, 5, 6, maybe was the fight to go to school, but that's what made Ryan really famous.
And when he became really essentially a public figure, you must have been heartened by the support he received from so many different people. I remember Michael Jackson, Elton John, and other people coming and supporting Ryan and supporting your family. What did that mean to you?
I think we felt like we weren't alone. And Ryan always said, for the first time, Mom, I feel like we're not fighting this disease alone, that we got other people fighting it with us. And I think for the first time, when he was first diagnosed, we saw such negativity. And to see so much positive with celebrities lending their face and voice to the AIDS epidemic, I think it made a big difference.
He died on April 8th, 1990, nearly 5.5 years after his diagnosis. And what were those final weeks and days like for you?
He was only supposed to live 3 to 6 months. And you have that planted in you that he's supposed to not live very long, but you don't want to ever go there. And so you can't prepare yourself. It was just like, this is not right. This is a dream. Nobody probably had more people praying over them than Ryan White did. And I just could not believe he was really, really gone. It was just, I don't even remember. I don't remember getting home that day. There's so many things I don't remember those last few days at the hospital because I don't know. I just could not hardly go there, even though I kind of knew, but I didn't want to go there.
And I'm sure what you do remember, I hope, was when Ryan was a vibrant young man and committing himself to helping other people who had faced a similar diagnosis. And Dr. Lisa Fitzpatrick is an infectious disease specialist with the United Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And Dr. Fitzpatrick, Ryan wasn't the only hemophiliac at the time who had been diagnosed with AIDS.
That's true. About 12,000 people contracted HIV through blood products. But the good news is since 2008 was the last time there's a known reported case of HIV transmission through the blood supply. And prior to that, we hadn't seen a case since 2002. So we've come a long way. The blood supply became safe in 1985. And now, fewer than 100 people since Ryan's death have contracted HIV through the blood supply.
Which is great news. And if Ryan were to have been diagnosed today, how would his prognosis be different in terms of the kinds of advancements that have been made?
Night and day. Because of the scientific advancements in HIV, Ryan would still be with us today. And we owe Ryan and you, Ms. White, a debt of gratitude because millions of our patients, because of the Ryan White Care Act, are able to get treatment that they need for HIV and live a long life.
Well, let's... So 25 years later, you still are involved. We saw you with President Obama and President Clinton, and you're still out there fighting. Why?
I think Ryan's legacy, there were so many people that contributed so much to this disease. Not just Ryan. Yes, his name was on the bill, but so many people that are no longer here. And so many of my friends just said, please do this for us. So not only, I think, do I continue the fight for Ryan, I continue for all the people that I have lost and loved.
Well, thank you for all that you've done. Jeannie White-Ginder, it's so nice to see you again.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your being here today.
Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.